Oh, and here we are. Good evening, everyone. Everyone out there on the YouTubes and the Twitches and the Periscopes and the Facebooks, all you people out there, hello. It's weird because this is the second live stream I've done today, as I said just a second ago in the chat, and it's the second live stream in a row where the little eyeball that tells me how many people are watching is not correct. I mean, I see more people chatting here than it says are watching, but hey, it's all good. It's all good. I don't care how many people are here. The show is what matters. The show is the thing, and I am here to be in the show. Khalil is here, Draftsman's here, Tech for Your Needs. We got Harshid. We got Hugo, of course. Ace is in the house. Let's see. Let's scroll up here and see who else we got. Alan's here from Ireland. Welcome, welcome. We got Chris M in the house. We got so we're packing them in. It's good, you know. Yeah, but it's been a day. Look, I got my Different Strokes coffee mug on the other side. It says Different Strokes. Does everybody remember Different Strokes? It's a completely inappropriate, racially charged television show from the 80s. Could never be on television today, but it's I got a mug. They were selling it at the grocery store. I love it though. I love it. See, here's a little story. Okay, it's a tiny story. So if you don't know, I was adopted, and I didn't find out until I was 18 years old, 17 years old, I think. But I had two birth certificates. One had my name, Jason Lewis, on it, and the other one, which my birth mother had like, I guess she had decided to give me up, and then she changed her mind, and then a day later she decided to give me up again. So anyway, my first name was Willis. It was Willis Allen Dunham would have been my name, and so and whenever I think of Different Strokes, I think of that. So tiny little story. I've been writing all kinds of personal essays and crap today. In the meantime, did a live stream with Anya from Restream about Restream, the streaming service that you should check out. Link down in the description below. This is So yeah. Anyway. What else we got going on? Thank you. Fox is in the house. We got William here. We got Bob is in the house. Drew is here. Amber's here. Amber, who I've known since I was like 12 years old or something. Oh yeah, that's the danger of streaming on Facebook, is that the people that have known you your whole life might show up in the stream. Sometimes my mom stops by to say hi. So yeah, but yeah. So oh man, what a day! I as I said in the chat before the show started, I did that live stream. I wrote an essay or an article for Medium. I did a podcast episode. Now I'm doing this live stream, and in the meantime, I've also been planning my videos for the week. Gary Coleman, it is a sad story. I mean, but yeah, there's some good stuff in there. But yeah. Wait, what's Ace ever remember the Different Strokes episode when Arnold's friend got them pictures of him by the bicycle shop owner? I don't remember that, man. I don't remember anything about the show except for Mr. Drummond, whose real name I don't remember, and then wasn't the woman who was on Facts of Life, wasn't she the housekeeper, Mrs. Garrett? Wasn't that how it worked? And then there was Willis, who was played by Todd Bridges. Now he died of he had a horrible drug related death, so that was bad. And then Gary Coleman, of course, playing Arnold. And I mean, it's so funny to think about the premises of 80s television shows that just so clearly would not fly in 2021. I was a huge Dukes of Hazzard fan when I was a kid. I mean, just like crazy huge. I had no concept of what the General Lee and the Confederate flag. I had no real concept of what those things were, right? And so I just loved that show. My dad's favorite artist was Waylon Jennings, and he did the theme song. And man, that was family TV watching. Sunday night, you'd start with Lawrence Welk, then it would be like Sonny and Cher, Donnie and Marie. I think we had the Dukes of Hazzard. It was all good. It was all good. I did not remember that Mr. Drummond was also on Maude. That is crazy. I mean, TV used to do that. It doesn't really do that anymore. But who really cares about TV anymore? Does anybody care about like sitcoms on television anymore? My favorite recent sitcom, Kim's Convenience. I enjoyed watching that. I'm waiting for the final season to show up in Netflix. Hasn't shown up yet. My daughter and I have just finished rewatching it. Well, we're not finished. We're in like season 8 or 7 of The Office. Season 7 of The Office, I think. And then there's this news from last night of Ellie Kemper being what was it, the Queen of Love and Beauty at this like weird like supremacist. I don't know that it was directly connected to like the KKK, but very sketchy things were in this organization, and so everybody's like canceling her now. Of course, 19-year-old kid wins a pageant and gets canceled. 20, 30, 25 years later, whatever it is, we got a $5 super chat from Gaylord. Keep up the good work. Excited about WWDC. Hopefully major iPad OS changes, but we'll see. Yes, we will see. Man, thank you for the transition out of the stuff that nobody probably wants to talk about. I certainly don't want to talk about the Friends reunion. I mean, was that really necessary? I don't know that it was, but I was never a fan of Friends. So HR Puffin stuff, yes, that was like, there was some stuff going on in the 70s on public television and like kids TV that was clearly inspired by the overuse of psychedelic drugs. I mean, if you look at Jim Henson's eyes, that guy was stoned all the time. Sesame Street. Anyway, last TV I owned was a CRT fat screen 15 years ago. But what are you watching this on? I mean, it's a screen, isn't it? I'm just saying. All the TVs on these screens now. So thank you, Gaylord, for the super chat. And yes, WWDC is coming up. What is it? Next Monday? Is it Monday? And people are hanging so much on what this WWDC is going to bring to the table. Everybody, I mean, to hear everyone talk about what needs to happen at WWDC next week, Apple better like just do everything. Not only are we, so I picked up this article. So let's pull the article up here, and we'll just look at it. So the article is from Apple Insider. I figured if I'm gonna look at Apple, potential rumor stuff, then we might as well look at Apple Insider. So here we have, of course, the much ballyhooed cartoons. Every time there's this cartoon, every time they put out these cartoons for these shows, they do something. Now, I'm looking in like this dude right here. Oh, you can't see my cursor, but the guy on the right has some AirPods in, and then it looks like he's got some kind of like, I don't know, some kind of, maybe it's just the corner of a screen. I don't know. He's got something in his eyes, and so everybody's always looking for clues. So somebody's coding over here, of course, because it's WWDC. They're disembodied heads staring at screens, but they're all MacBook Pro screens, seemingly. And I hope that they give us the opportunity to put our own faces like they did last year on these things. Oh, man. You just put the Barney Miller theme in my head. All you had to do was say Barney Miller, and suddenly the theme is in there. That it's like a cross between the Barney Miller theme and the Sanford and Son theme. You know who wrote the Sanford and Son theme? Quincy Jones. Quincy Jones wrote the Sanford and Son theme. Man is a genius. Man was playing with, jazz greats at 16 years old. He wrote the Sanford and Son theme. Anyway, uh, so I'm checking this out and seeing what all the rumors have said, right? And people, it's all the same stuff. Like, we're going to get the next version of the M1 chip, whether that's M1X or M2 or whatever. And we're going to get a new, bigger iMac, and maybe we're getting a 16-inch MacBook Pro. This article goes on to make the point that at this point, if we're in a 2-year transition from Intel to Apple Silicon, at this point, there are only 3 computers left that don't have the silicon treatment. That would be the MacBook Pro, the iMac, and the Mac Pro. And I'm not even entirely sure. I haven't looked it up. I don't know, but I'm not entirely sure that the Mac Pro will. I mean, I'm sure maybe it'll go. I'm sure it'll go. But right now, I mean, the Mac Pro, those real Pro computers that cost like $30,000, the turnover time on those, like, I'd be really, really ticked off if last year I bought a $30,000 computer and then the next year they made a cheaper one that was twice as fast. So that's some of the rumors. We've seen all kinds of renders of, I don't know, Mac Minis that look like sandwich containers, and it just all kinds of weird stuff. But if you're not familiar with WWDC, which most people who are probably watching this are, but for your benefit, if you're not super familiar with how Apple works, WWDC stands for the Worldwide Developers Conference. It used to be called Apple World, I think, or something like that. Anyway, it's all the developers for all of the different arms of Apple's products. Well, they used to get together and have this event, but now it's all virtual. And so most of it is supposed to be about software. It's supposed to be about new versions of all of the operating systems every year. Last year we got iOS 14. This year we get iOS 15. iPad OS, Mac OS. Last year we got Mac OS Big Sur, which was the huge switch over from iOS 10 to iOS 11. And so, I mean, we've got all of this stuff coming. I guess there's going to be, what is known is that it will be called Mac OS 12. Mac OS 12, we're just going from 10 to 12, like 11. I hardly knew you. So we're getting a new Mac OS. Nobody knows what California location it's going to be named after. So iOS 15, iPad OS 15. Let's see. Revision to the lock screen, they say. iOS 15's apps will get a new look too. Now, I got into a little bit of a Twitter argument with some folks about the actual, like, app icons, not how they look, but whether or not you should be able to move them around. My thought is, like, okay, it's been this way forever. Is it the most elegant solution? No, it's kind of crappy, and everything moves around when you try and move one app. But that's the way iOS has always worked. And you tell me if you think that this makes sense. But people want to make their own home pages and stuff and move things around to where they want them, and all that kind of thing. And to me, I'm just kind of like, yeah. I mean, if you really want to do that, you can go over to the other side. Mac OS Forks of Salmon. Isn't there've got to be some really good California names. Although, do they have to be like natural landmarks or? Yeah, Mac OS Skid Row. Yeah, Mac OS Skid Row. Mac OS Folsom Prison, perhaps. Uh, Mac OS San Quentin. Oh, I'm cracking myself up now. So one of the big things that everybody wants to see, and this is the big discussion, this is the big thing that everyone's been talking about. So Apple made the decision to put the M1 chip inside of the iPad, right? That's great. Now you have the most powerful iPad ever conceived in any reality, and it can't run like the programs that could actually do the stuff that you would want to do with it. So everybody's talking about getting app support for things like the Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro. Well, the Adobe Suite is not an Apple product, but we'd love to see native iPad. Well, we'd love to see native M1 support for Adobe, but you know what I'm saying. But yeah, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we're not going to get it. And there are going to be a lot of really ticked off iPad owners. And especially those iPad owners who bought the 12.9-inch mini LED iPad and they, I guess there's a lot of ghosting on the mini LEDs. So there's a halo around everything that's bright white. And then but then again, it's like Marques Brownlee says, don't buy something for what it might do in the future. I don't always agree with that, but in this case, I don't think that we're going to get support for Final Cut. I would love to be surprised. But I don't see it coming. As always, they're going to update, the Watch and Apple TV. Some people are talking about dropping support for Apple Watch Series 3. And I don't know how I feel about that. I love the fact that they kept Series 3 around, and Series 3 kind of became like the I don't know, the Mac, the iPad, like the cheapo iPad of Apple Watches, right? And in doing so, it gave people the opportunity to get an Apple Watch. Like I got my wife an Apple Watch for the first time last year when the Series 3 went down to, I think, what was it, $200 for the smaller one. So I got her one of those things, and she loves it. She uses it all the time. She can't, she feels weird when she has to take it off to charge it. so I don't know. But as they point out in this article, the Apple Watch Series 3 came out in 2017, so it wouldn't be a surprise for a 4-year-old model to lose support. Whereas the Apple TV HD was released in 2015, and it would be surprising to see that dropped. That's not apples to apples, but I see what they're saying. I mean, I think this is the last year that the iPhone 6S and 6S Plus will have support, or was iOS 14 the last, or is this the last? I can never really remember, but iOS 14 may have been the last version of iOS to support the 6S and 6S Plus. So it would make sense that maybe, stuff from 2017, which would have been the iPhone 7, will start to not see support. But I don't get the feeling that, at least software wise, the Apple Watches have gotten so much different that it would be possible for the Apple Watch Series 3 to be out of date at this point. Oh, now Bob puts an America song in my head. Yeah, man. I just listened to that song last night. I don't know why. Another reason why I hate streaming services. Like I just get lazy, and I start playing songs that is like, oh, there's that song. I like that song. It's not any kind of directed music listening experience. I'm just like, ooh. So Gaylord says he thinks that we're gonna get Final Cut, maybe Logic, but no crazy iPadOS changes, maybe more usable widgets. Now, okay, let's take a little informal poll here in the audience. For those of you still who carry an iPad around or use an iPhone, put A in the chat if you still use widgets that came out last year. Put B in the chat if you just went back to using iOS the way that it's always been. So start throwing those things in there, because I very quickly sort of didn't pay any attention to the widgets. The ones that updated themselves and told me like sort of contextual information, I kind of did, but I didn't really. So we got a couple of B's already. I think I know where this is going to go. Khalil never bothered trying the widgets. Rockmirth. What is Rockmirth says B. God, now it's going too fast. I can't. Ace says A. Ooh, still using the widgets. Thinking Fox. None of the above for Thinking Fox. He hasn't used it. God, every time I try and click on it, it goes away. It goes up. Haven't used an Apple product since the iPhone 3GS. Well, okay. That's a while ago. Who has time for A? I don't know. Chronic Town, though, that's a great record. Great record. I respect your screen name. Thank you for that. REM is due for like an appreciation moment. They've been gone long enough. They're no longer insufferable as they became after becoming world famous. Let's see. What does Khalil have to say here? I like my home screen and app layout the way it was. I'm too lazy to reorganize my home screen all over again. I agree. Like I say, I do like the contextual widgets, the ones that will show you different things at different times of the day, or they'll scroll through your photos and weather and other stuff. I like those. But the problem, well, what I like about it is how, I don't know about you, but I don't often go into like my Photos app and look at photos. So I like that it would sort of surface photos on those apps or on those widgets every once in a while. And right now, Google Photos is being much more aggressive about like, hey, remember this day in 2008? I'm like, man, I don't remember that day in 2008, but I was much younger, less gray. My daughter was small. So yeah. But otherwise, the widgets just, yeah. Oh, Athens back in the day. Yeah. Well, I was in Athens just briefly. Like, an ex-girlfriend of mine went to UGA for a year after she graduated high school, and I went down there to visit her on spring break, and went to the 40 Watt Club and saw a band that I'd only heard of but didn't know anything about, called Uncle Tupelo. And Uncle Tupelo became, like, years later, one of my favorite bands in the world, and still is to this day. But at the time, I had no idea who they were. We just wanted to go to the 40 Watt Club. So I think that was 1992. Yeah. March of 1992, I think it was. It's when they recorded a record while they were there. John Mack says, if an M1X MacBook Pro 16 comes out, that's the one for you and I. That's, yeah. Yeah, I would be intrigued by that one for sure. But I kind of want the 27-inch or 30. I still think 32 is a very popular size for monitors these days. So I could see them taking the 27-inch iMac and making the bezels smaller, and then making it like a 32-inch screen. Now, if we got a 32-inch iMac, that basically would be the replacement of the iMac Pro in my eyes. If that were available, I might go that way, and not the MacBook way, because the thing about the MacBook now is, if you want an M1 chip, or you want, Apple's got everything kind of screwed up at this point. Because now all the computers are the same. They've got 5 computers, if you count the iPad as a computer. They've got 5 machines with the same processor and pretty much all the same specs, all the same options, what few options there are. And so how do you decide between those 5? Because it used to be like with the 27-inch or with the 16-inch or 15-inch MacBook Pro, it's like, well, the i9 is $3,000, but the i7 base model is $500 cheaper. So which do I split the difference and go for the one that's in the middle? These days, there's not. The difference between the models is like a couple of $100. I don't know if that's going to hold with these newer models that are going to come out with these more powerful chips. But I really believe that we're kind of in this process of making Apple boring. And that's I'll talk about this a little bit later when we're done with this topic. But I've been thinking about, so I've had my iMac now for a week. Today's a week. And I've used it half a dozen times. And the best thing that I can say about the iMac is that it is a very competent computer. I don't know what else to say about it. It's not impressive. It doesn't do anything special. Like Steve Jobs used to say, like, I want the Mac to be like an appliance that people use in their homes, like, the computer appliance that is the analog of like the toaster or the refrigerator. I think that Apple has finally gotten to the place where this new iMac is as close to an appliance as you could possibly get. There's nothing really special about it whatsoever. And it does everything perfectly fine. If you want to push it a little harder, you can. The screen is a decent size and it looks really good. The keyboard is nice. But I keep trying to think, like, well, what do I have to say about it? And the truth of the matter is, like, nothing. I've got nothing to say about it. It's like, look, it's blue. And it runs programs. I literally had the thing set up in 5 minutes. And then there was nothing else to do. It's like getting your oil changed. It's just boring. So I don't know. I'll rail about that a little bit more. And the thing is, like, everybody's like, oh, Jason, he's going to complain about everything. He's always got something to complain about. Well, the problem is, like, it's not that I'm complaining. It's a perfectly competent computer that will work great and be great for a lot of people for a long time, which there's nothing wrong with that. But when you talk about this stuff all the time and Apple releases a product that doesn't give you anything to talk about besides what color it is, like, what are you supposed to, what am I supposed to do with that? Come on, Apple, what am I supposed to do with that? It is like a perfectly serviceable computer that comes in colors. and no, I don't mean, well, first let me get to Bush's question here. No Apple lover, maybe there'll be more security updates, new pencils, and Apple VR. So this article that I was talking about before does talk a little bit about Apple Glass, but they weren't necessarily like they weren't saying it was very likely that Apple Glass would be on the horizon, because the developers who would make the software for Apple Glass would have to first see, be able to develop for it. So the fact that it's not there is not looking good for Apple Glass being a thing. And so Chronic Town, when you say boring, do I mean consumer? It's not consumer versus pro, because I mean, probably a large, probably a huge portion of people who are professionals, even in like more heavy duty stuff like graphic design or other things like that, could get by fine on like a mid range 24-inch iMac. And that's a great thing. And so I don't necessarily mean consumer versus pro, and therefore the consumer version is boring. I just mean that Apple is like, it used to be that there was friction between the lines of like each device. There was some kind of friction point that you could point to and say, should you buy this one or should you buy that one? And now it's like, okay, well, I could get a MacBook Air and it would be the same thing as buying a 24-inch iMac. The performance differences aren't that great, except for, as we found out, I saw Greg Skagit's video about this. I don't know who else covered it, but I guess I know that Trenton from Tech Rant also made a video about it. But I guess with the $12.99 version of, they never told anybody, but they have one fewer fan in there. There's one fan instead of two, and that seems to make the chip cool less efficiently, which makes that machine run more slowly. So it used to be that the base model iMacs would be pretty decent buys for most people, but I think that might not be the case for this $12.99 version, because knowing what I know now, if anybody were to ask me, I'd say you have to start at the $14.99 version and go up from there. But even in doing that, like, add another $200 and you get a 512 gigabyte storage drive, same amount of RAM. There's nothing to choose. There's nothing to choose from. I don't know. It's like, well, you can have 8 gigabytes of RAM or 16. How am I supposed to brag about 16 gigabytes of RAM? Like the whole paradigm of how we talk about computers is shifting when it comes to Apple, because when all of the machines are the same, then there's just not really any friction, nothing to talk about. As Hugo says, great computer, nothing to see here. And that's pretty much what it is. It's perfectly serviceable in just about every way that you would want it to. There are quality of life improvements in the Touch ID on the keyboard, and the new design is nice. I don't personally, aesthetically, I don't know if I like the new design as much as I like the old design. Mostly, but there's something about the new sort of chin that doesn't have the Apple logo in the middle of it that makes the whole front of it look unfinished. Well, it's not, Bob. It's not just $200 for an extra fan. It's $200 for an extra fan, an extra GPU core, and and 2 more ports and an Ethernet port. So you get USB-C 4, Thunderbolt 3, 2 and 2, Ethernet, 1 more fan, and then you get the Touch ID keyboard. So I mean, that's a decent amount of stuff for $200. Or yeah, so I think it's a decent deal. It's not like, if you wanted back in the old days with the iPhones, like if you wanted more than 16 gigabytes of storage, you had to pay like some ungodly amount of money for it. $200 from 13 to $1,500 is a reasonable amount. Whereas like $200 for an extra 16 gigabytes of storage and no other differences back in the old days with the iPhones was kind of a drag. I think the S21 has DDR. I don't know if it does or not. I do know that DDR4 is still like the standard for PC and Macs for that. Well, actually, no, not anymore. But when Macs were running Intel, it was DDR4. But I do know that D is on the horizon. So Tech for Now says it's about form factors, memory, and storage now. Apple turned the i5, i7, i9 argument on its head. They did. They did. And see, this is my question. Will it be to their detriment? Will everybody just go for the cheapest option now? And do they even care? I'm not sure. Like, I think that there's a segment of the buying population that wants to get, like, the impressive Ferrari of Mac computers, right? And now they everybody, it's like Volkswagens used to be like this. When it was the Volkswagen Beetle, it's like, you get the Beetle, and it can, it has crank down windows, it has no air conditioning, the heat never works, there's nothing, it's just car. Here is car. And the new Macs kind of feel like the old Volkswagens, where it's just like, there are no options, there are no choices. You get a little bit more for a little bit more money, but you never really notice the difference unless you're really paying attention. So yeah. Frederick says, still loving the M1 MacBook Pro. Never thought I'd like the size and portability since I'm normally a 16-inch and greater person. I'm not going to make the joke. I guess I just did make the joke, didn't I? But yeah, I kind of felt the same way. Whereas, like, okay, the only thing that stopped me from keeping the 13-inch was the fact that I couldn't run more external monitors off of it. And since that was the case for me, I knew I'd have to wait for the next model. So that kind of puts me in the position of, like, okay, so I wait for the next model. The thing that I'm afraid of is the pricing. Like, is every 16-inch MacBook Pro going to be over $2,000, or are they going to come in at $1,500? Do you know what I mean? I don't know where they're going to go with the pricing. I mean, Apple's been leaning toward more reasonable prices recently, but they they could come in and, like, demand a premium for these things. Bob says Macs are boutique computers. I would have agreed with you. Up until recently. But now I really feel like Apple is making a push toward the Mac being a very mainstream computer, in the sense that, like I'm talking about, they don't really have, there's not a big separation between one or the other, and so all the machines are relatively the same, and so now boutique computers are like, the PCs that the custom built PCs that you make for yourself, or the ones that you make to order off of any, Digital Storm or something like that. And Macs are just kind of like off the shelf. You go to Walmart and buy a heater and a Mac. So the toaster oven and a Mac, they're all the same. Okay, so Bushman has a $5 super chat worthy question, and it's a weird question. He says, of any PC manufacturer that has a U.S. military contract, could you see Apple going private corporations only in the future? No, I don't think so. And I'm sure that PC manufacturers out there contract with the military. I don't know. I mean, because military people have PC, like a computer on their desk that's just like any other computer. It might have different kind of security enforcement, but it's pretty much the same thing. So I would imagine, but I'm not really sure. Yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't think Apple. I don't know that Apple has a big portion of the military contract. He says about Apple, I mean, can they sell PC exclusive to big corporations like Exxon or something, maybe even NASA? I don't know. I mean, Apple's modus operandi these days is trying to get as many devices as they can into as many hands as they can, because they realize that the services are what they're really selling in the next 10 years, not so much the machines themselves. So they're making the machines easier to choose and less differentiated, and having a smaller difference in price and performance, so that people can then say, well, I can buy the Mac of my choice, whether it's a MacBook Air, a Mini, an iMac, big old MacBook Pro, whatever. I can buy all those things and choose the one that's right for me and not really be losing out on anything, which is both a great thing, but also like a boring thing, as I said before. Winston's got a super chat going here. What is SGD? I don't know. What is that? Somebody tell me what SGD is. For character stretching his arm forward, raising up his thumb. Okay. I'm Is that like some kind of an emoji description? I'm not sure. Did I ever use the Macintosh 128K? No, I did not. No, I never had that one. Linus says he's not a PC guy anymore. Linus only makes videos about PCs, unless he's making a like dump on Apple video. So I don't. He does not know on which side his bread is buttered. Singapore dollar. Thank you, Hugo. Thank you. Appreciate it. Panasonic does with its tough books. Yeah, I don't know that you can buy. I think you have to be like a corporate type entity to buy a tough book, don't you? I've never seen a tough book at Best Buy. IBM has deployed 250,000 Macs throughout their organization. Well, that's certainly ironic. That's something. That's something right there. I mean, some younger people might not know like all the history, but IBM was like the computer company, and Apple and Compaq and all these other sort of like startup companies were the competition against big, well, they called it Big Blue, IBM. Like, they were huge, and now IBM's using Macs. It's something funny. Michael Pepper in the chat says, what's really changed is the base i3 models of the MacBook Air, iMac were really for basic tasks like email, browsing, media consumption. But you were forced to pay for the other stuff and the RAM. Yeah, so you're forced to pay for the i5, the i7, the i9, and more RAM, as well as more storage. And yeah, now it's changed to where there's just not that much of a differentiation between one model or the other. I never thought that the day would come where I would say a MacBook Air is as capable a machine in its base model configuration as as this 13-inch MacBook Pro or the iMac or any of those things. I never thought that day would come. Michael says, now Apple offers something most people can do those things. Even do 4K 60 video editing. Had a hard time trying to put the base model MacBook Air on its knees. Yeah. That's what is really surprising. I mean, and that's what I was really surprised when I watched Greg's video and saw the CPU benchmarks for the base model iMac. And it's the first time that we've seen any real difference in performance between any of these M1 models. And it's weird. I mean, Greg posited that it must be something about the cooling efficiency with only one fan. But then again, like, the MacBook Air has no fans, and it runs nearly as well as the MacBook Pro that has one fan. These things seem to be impervious to like thermal throttling, but maybe that's what we're seeing in the iMac. I'm not sure. I have to look into it more. Michael says it's become the iPhone of computers. Yeah, more you pay for RAM, storage, and ports, similar to the Pro and Pro Max. Adding a camera, same processing power. Yeah, I agree with that. But what I would like to see is something like a Pro model of Mac, whether it be a 16-inch, a larger iMac, a Pro Mac Mini, or whatever it is. I would like to see there be a choice, not where it's like, okay, the M1 perfectly capable, more than most people need. You don't have to perseverate over that. You don't have to worry. You just grab that if you're a basic user, or if you have like, even moderate heavy usage, grab that thing. You'll be totally fine. For you, for the other folks, here we go. We've got something that's got a little bit more meat on its bones, and we go from there. That's what I'd really like to see, because otherwise, like, why would I ever buy a 16-inch MacBook Pro if it's not going to be significantly better than the 13-inch MacBook Pro? Unless they're building in sort of artificial hindrances. Like, well, the multiple monitor thing is not an artificial hindrance. It's just that one USB bus can only do so much, and you can't run 3 different monitors off of one USB bus effectively. So they need the other 2 ports, and that's ultimately what I hope we get, is something that we can say, okay, here's something that is very clearly more powerful. It's got more professional accoutrement, and it's clearly for the professional. Because if they don't, I don't know that anybody's going to buy. I mean, I guess it has to do with price, but if we get a 27-inch iMac that starts at $2,000 and is only moderately faster than the 24-inch iMac, then is anybody going to buy the 27-inch? There has to be like a significant value add, right? Khalil asks, do I use an iPad? I do. Um, I have an iPad Pro, 12.9-inch, 2018 model, and I don't really use it for anything, but nothing like exciting. I use it for like email and YouTube and reading a book, just normal things. And I don't feel like I've ever put it through any kind of paces. I've edited video on it a couple of times, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I know plenty of people who do edit video on those machines, and that's great. And I thought about getting the iPad Pro, the 12.9-inch iPad Pro with the M1 chip in it. In fact, I went on Best Buy's website. They had one in a store in Cedar Rapids, and I bought it. And then 20 minutes later, I'm like, what use do I have for that? And I canceled my order. So the iPad is a weird device, because for 99% of anything that you would want to use it for, it's been fine. Like, you could use a 2015 iPad, and 99% of what you want to do would work fine, and you don't have to worry about it, right? So I think the only way that it would make sense for me to upgrade from my 2018 iPad to the 2021 iPad is if the new desktop, if a new desktop comes out, and that's a computer that I'm going to decide that's going to be my main computer, and I need a computer to run around and do other things on, then it's between the iPad and the MacBook Air or MacBook Pro, right? And there's literally no difference between any of those computers. It's like, do I want a real keyboard that's really pretty nice? Do I want a fan? do I want something that's more, it's not even more versatile, because while the Magic Keyboard is nice, it's not a substitute for the actual, butterfly with no, they're not butterfly, the actual keyboards and trackpads that come on MacBooks, right? So that's the only way that I could see myself needing or wanting to get a new iPad. And 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 at that point, like, you can buy a 2020 iPad, 12.9-inch 2020 iPad. I looked this up yesterday. They're selling for like $450 on Swappa. $450 for a machine that's barely a year old, that's running a really good processor, that's not gonna be out of date for anytime soon, right? And there's not anything currently with iPad OS that you can do to really tax it to its limits. So why would you pay $1,500 for, an M1 iPad when you can get, starting at $450, the iPad of last year? I just don't know. It's just really a weird question to me. Like, Apple is kind of, and Rene Ritchie says this all the time, Apple is not afraid to sort of make their products compete with one another. And I'm glad, and I agree with that to a certain extent. And I think it's a good method, but right now Apple could just as easily have an iPad, two laptops, and two Macs, and that would be it. And you could even make the argument that they could go with iPad, one laptop, and one iMac, and that would be it, because there's no need for any of the other stuff. I mean, I'm glad they have lower cost iPads for folks that can't afford to spend $1,000 on an iPad. I'm glad that that's an option, but Apple is kind of competing with themselves in the extreme at this moment. Michael says, I think we're headed in the direction of the iPad Air versus Pro, where the Air is plenty powerful, but the Pro has the larger display, more RAM storage, and 120 hertz. Apple likes to foreshadow. Yeah, I agree. But that's one mystery that we're gonna have to unravel, is, as we talked about last week, right now, it doesn't matter if you have 8 or 16 gigabytes of storage of memory in your iPad. Developers can only access up to 5 gigabytes of that memory. So if you got 16, as iPad OS exists right now, you can't use it. You can't use what you paid for. So that's going to have to change, and that's something that WWDC is going to have to deal with. Because if they don't change iPad OS somewhat significantly, I would think there's less and less of a reason for people to buy these iPad Pros, as Michael was pointing out. Like, the lower model iPads are fine. Now, if you lots of graphics related work gets done on an iPad, and lots of pros are using iPads these days instead of Wacom styluses and that kind of thing. Lots of people are also using Surface Pros and that sort of thing. But iPad Pros with the Apple Pencil are pretty much becoming a standard at this point. And so if they don't do something with iPad OS, then they're really gonna have this really weird, like, blockage between people maybe wanting to get an iPad and having all the power that you could have with a Mac, but not being able to do all the things that you would want to do on a Mac. And the only reason that that's the case is because they don't run the same operating system, and it's only because Apple doesn't want them to. Unless there's something that I don't know. And I don't think there is. As JCP says, iPad OS really needs to mutate to a Mac OS Lite. I agree with that. And I think when we were talking with Andrew Edwards a week or two ago, he mentioned the fact, or maybe this was just on Twitter. He mentioned it to me that Mac OS is not very touch. It's not designed to be touch friendly, which is funny to me because Windows 10 was designed to be touch friendly and to have like a dual use possibility, and 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 so it's weird to me that Mac OS hasn't, especially since they've had all of this, they've had these mobile devices. Like, it's surprising to me that they haven't moved more toward building in elements of touch capability, even if touch capability isn't part of the ecosystem at this point. But to me, if Apple remains in this like sort of artificial hardline of mobile devices and they run some version of iOS, and Macs are Macs and they run some version of Mac OS, and never the two shall meet, and yet they're forcing these products to compete against one another, then we're going to have this situation where no product is going to be the right solution for any one person. So it's really hard. Bob says Scott Adams uses a Wacom tablet to draw Dilbert. Scott Adams is like 90 years old at this point, isn't he? I don't know. I mean, I'm surprised that he uses a Wacom tablet and not a Stone tablet. I mean, we're talking about Dilbert anyway. But Michael says, for me, it's transfer speeds and apps taking advantage of the external transfer speeds, and there are some codec efficiencies that I've seen with the M1 iPads handle better than the 2018 and 2020 when compared. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt that at all. Just the fact that it has Thunderbolt and not just straight up USB-C makes it attractive. But like, is there a viable use case for someone to want to do that at this point right now? I'm not sure that there is, because I don't think I could like grab a, say, Universal Audio Aero, which is in fact, I know I couldn't. Universal Audio Aero, which is the Thunderbolt 3 interface, plug it into an iPad and make it work. Because the iPad can't run the console software that's necessary. It can't handle the plugins that are necessary. It does. It's like, so yeah, it's just not a perfect situation. Cleo says, I was just about to bring that up. iPad OS and iOS have the Mac OS kernel inside of it, so technically they are Mac OS Lite. It's just different user interface, so there's nothing really stopping. The only thing that's stopping them, and I think it would Jaws. What is it? Joswiak, the guy, I get him confused with Wozniak. I think he was the one who came out and said a month or two ago that iPads will never run Mac OS. And to me, that's like cutting off your nose to spite your face. I don't understand. Now that the capabilities have dovetailed to the point where they can be basically the same machines in different form factors, and if in fact the Mac OS kernel is what iOS is generated from, then why can't they make the change? And I just think so. Tech for Your Needs brings up the good point. Christopher Lawley makes it work for his needs. And if you haven't watched Christopher Lawley's channel, he does really cool stuff. I mean, he has really dug deep into making the iPad work for him and his workflow. And so he has no need for anything else other than the iPad, right? But in some ways, I kind of look at Christopher Lawley and his channel in the same way as it's like a minimalist channel. It's like minimalists live the way that they live because they choose to. right? And it has certain benefits that they reap from doing it. But at the end of the day, that lifestyle isn't going to be mainstream. And so I look at Christopher Lawley's channel and everything that he's been able to do, and I think like this is fantastic. He's done an amazing job of making this like a really robust system for himself. But the average Joe off the street is not going to take the time or make the effort to do all the things that Christopher Lawley has done to make the iPad work for him. At some point, if you want to do desktop related things, you need a desktop operating system. I believe that with every fabric of my being. And if Apple's not going to put that into an iPad, then there's no reason to buy an iPad that has the same specs as the there's no reason to buy an iPad that has the specs of a Mac if it can't do Mac things. So, yeah. Draftsman says my MacBook Pro 2014 still has all the ports. I feel powerful. But then you try to open up Photoshop. Yeah. I mean, I had a 2015 MacBook Pro at my old job, and that machine worked fine. And I never really had any problem getting it to do things. It just did them much more slowly. And I would be curious to know what it would be like to use that machine now. It's almost 2 years down the road, and would that machine still hold up as well? Because Macs are pretty well known to be very serviceable machines over the course of many more years than a PC of a similar vintage would be, right? Like PC laptops have gotten a lot better over the last few years, but they used to be by and large trash. And I remember buying a PC laptop for grad school, and a year after I finished grad school, so like this is less than 3 years of having the PC laptop, it was unusable. I couldn't hardly open anything. It was just unusable. And yes, I could upgrade the RAM and all that kind of stuff, but you could do that with Macs at that time as well. These days, PC laptops are much better. Thelonious Mac. I don't even know what this means. Can anybody tell me what this means? So it's a super sticker. Okay, see, this is so funny because I don't have the YouTube chat open. I just get all the chat here in Restream, so I don't get to see the sticker. I just get to see the description of the sticker. Pear character doing a classic mic drop. Okay, thank you, man. I think that the description is funnier than what the sticker would be. Michael says, we have to remember they aren't putting a Mac chip into an iPad. They put an iPad chip into a Mac, and there are differences. Like swap memory isn't on the iPad OS chip, but on Mac there is. That's very true. But now that they've sort of crossed the Rubicon and put the same kind of chip in both computers, it's not outside of the bounds of possibility that they could be exactly the same. I mean, again, I'm a doctor, not a hardware designer. I don't know anything about these things. But I would imagine that it is more possible today than it was, a month ago. So ThinkPads have never been trashed. Now that's true. That's true. But a ThinkPad is like the MacBook Pro, or at least it used to be, the MacBook Pro of PC laptops. Most PC laptops before 2017-ish, when gaming laptops started to be more popular and they were built more robustly, and more powerfully, for that matter, ThinkPads were the exception and not the rule when it came to PC laptops. The Lenovo ThinkPads, I don't know if they're of the same quality, but they say ThinkPad. They got the little red thing in the middle. Corey says, I could see Apple selling iPad Pro as they are and then making a subscription that would unlock more macOS-like features. That's an interesting take. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe. I mean, the thing that I've always liked about Apple and their own software, like their Final Cut, Logic, and that stuff, is that you buy Logic and you pay it $300 once or $200 or whatever it is once, and then you get all the upgrades, you get all of the everything. Now, some apps that you buy, like I used to use this program called Scrivener, the writing program, really good program, but then it lost, like, I started a new book and wrote like 2 chapters, and then like the 2 chapters just vanished into the ether. And I wrote their customer service, and they're like, "Oh, we're really sorry to hear that." I'm like, dude, that is not the answer that I want from you. So I don't use Scrivener anymore. But you had to buy the Mac OS version and you had to buy the iOS version, and they both were like $50. So I hope that it doesn't come down to, like, if Logic Pro and Final Cut become available on an iPad, I hope that they become available on an iPad without having to, repurchase, I guess. Laurent is here, and he says, Jason, good to see you, man. Okay. Thelonious says, you've got to get out and see the world. I'm in the midst of converting a law office to all iPads right now. It's not all about Final Cut Pro. No, I totally agree with you. I'm not, again, like, a lot of this is niche kind of needs, but to me, it's not that everybody needs or wants it. It's more that it's like it's a watermark. It's a benchmark for being able to say that the two things are on par with one another. It's like now that it's like ostensibly possible, the artificially saying it's not going to happen just upsets me. And so if we get through WWDC and there's nothing said about being able to use just even Apple's like proprietary programs cross-platform, then I'm going to be a little bummed out. And I realize that it's a very niche group of people that need, say, Final Cut or something like that, and that there's no, I'm sure. I mean, having worked in a medical school and been around a hospital, I know that lots of people are using both the Surface Pros as well as iPads as their main device. I mean, the Surface Pro is a computer. and so I would love to see that distinction be stripped away. I'd love for the iPad to be able to sort of stand on the same footing as, say, a Surface Pro in that it runs a desktop operating system. And so it's but Apple seems stubbornly against doing that. And yeah, like Bob's saying, a lot of hospitals are using iPads and iPad minis for note taking. And if you think about it, with the way things are developing, it's a much more efficient way of keeping track of all the information that you have to keep track of. If it's all in one system like Epic, and all of Epic goes to one place, but all the devices can access it and update charts and everything from a mobile device as well as a computer, then it's a much better situation. Laurent says, I'm just joining, so not sure what has been said already, but about WWDC. Pro apps coming to the iPad finally. I really hope, that we've talked about that. I mean, we're kind of talking about it again now. I'm going on record as saying I will be really surprised if they do. I'll be really surprised if they do bring that stuff. I would love it if they did, but I do think that the way that the iPads are configured now that, especially with something like Logic, the infrastructure of external devices that you have to be able to use with Logic is extreme. Like what you could use with an iPad is extremely limited compared to what you can use with a MacBook or an iMac, unless they change the operating system entirely and go entirely over to the desktop operating system. And then, if you have a Thunderbolt interface that has its own proprietary driver that can be loaded onto the iPad, then we're talking. But I just don't know if we're there. JCP says Apple doesn't have an issue with cannibalizing products. The iPhone replaced the iPod. iPad should replace the iMac with a more Mac OS like operating system. I agree. I agree. There's no reason why you couldn't do that. In fact, I've seen some really cool iPad docks. I forget what company has made it, but this iPad dock that used like sort of a MagSafe type thing. So you just slap it onto this aluminum stand, and then you've got a keyboard and a mouse, and the iPad just basically becomes like a smaller version of the 24-inch iMac. Yeah, I don't. There's no reason why. Maybe it is that Kensington dock. Yeah, there's no reason why one iPad couldn't be the only device that most everybody needs. And it seems like Apple's going further and further in that direction. But yeah, my big question is: are they going to allow it to happen? Are they going to allow the iPad to become more of a full-fledged desktop experience, or are they going to keep it sort of hobbled as a quasi-mobile OS? I don't know. Laurent says, I don't think Mac OS should be on the iPad, but the iPad absolutely does need some kind of better OS for things like folder management, some kind of Finder. Yeah, I mean, what's there now? See, I think what would be perfect is, well, I think what they wanted iCloud to be, which is iCloud sits on your computer and it acts like a file system, but none of the files, except for the ones that you say you want, are sitting locally on your device. But it works like a file management system in folders where all the stuff is there and available. But instead of doing that, it all just kind of like, some of it sits on the computer some places, like how do you find it? It's just very confusing. Try and hook up an external SSD or something, and it's just not all ready for prime time quite yet. All right, Take For Your Needs is writing a novel over here. This is what I think about iPad Pro having Pro apps. Yes, it can be done. Remember, iPad OS is an app operating system, meaning you live in the app and not as much on the operating system. Just port Final Cut Pro if it is too much to do a light version of like Adobe Rush. Not saying the port of the Mac OS entirely. That's just my 2 cents on the subject. I don't disagree with you. I don't disagree with you on that. I don't know that like we need Mac OS on the iPad, but I do know that having GarageBand and iMovie instead of, and not having the option to jump up to Final Cut and Logic Pro when you're spending this basically the same amount of money on the devices, and you want that same kind of functionality, I want to have the option. I don't want to have to go to a third party. I mean, LumaFusion is a great program, and it's basically Final Cut in everything but name. But at the same time, it's kind of like, well, okay. I mean, Apple just seems to be not doing it, and because they don't say so, I really don't know why. But I would love to see a port of those programs, even if they are like semi-light versions, because even a semi-light version of Final Cut Pro is going to be a better solution on the iPad than iMovie. iMovie is great, but it is purposefully crippled. And the same goes for GarageBand. GarageBand is great, but it's not the same experience as using a real DAW. So I want to see something like that happen. Franklin says that's all well and good, but web apps exist on Mac OS. That's true. Um, and I, at the end of the day, well, I mean, today in the discussion that I was having about Restream doesn't have an app for Android and iOS at this point. So you have to use their interface through the web portal, and it ends up not being as functional. And so I don't know how much from one program to the next that would work. That would work. I mean, it's the concept of a Chromebook, like everything happening within the confines of like the browser structure. Chromebooks work great for the things that Chromebooks can do, but I don't know anybody that edits video on a Chromebook. You know what I'm saying? So I just think that we've reached this like uncanny valley between mobile device and computer, and now we're just like the two things are bumping up against one another, and the difference between the two is more palpable now than it's ever been. Like when the iPad first came out, nobody expected it to be as functional as a computer, but as time has gone on, iPads have proven themselves to be able to be as functional as 90% of the computers out there, and now they've even got the same stuff under the hood. So at what point do we sort of like cross this thing and make them similar? What DAW do I use? Right now, I've been a Logic Pro user. I've used Logic since before Logic was owned by Apple. So I think that was Logic 6 was where I started. And that would have been in probably 2002. And so I guess I still use Logic, although I'm not using a Mac right now, so I can't use it. I've been using Studio One 5 from PreSonus, and I really like it. I really like it. It's not making me miss Logic all that much, which when I've tried to switch DAWs in the past, there have been certain things about Logic that have made me go back. And Studio One is not making me want to go back. I mean, other than having to port stuff from one to the other, which is always annoying. Never try and switch horses midstream, folks. That's my advice. Something always gets lost. Yuko says, I'm not one of Apple's customer segments anymore. Makers, creatives used to be Apple's main focus back in the day. Now it feels like you're hacking your device when you aim for those use cases. That is true at this point. I mean, I think that it's easier. Like we're in this weird in between zone where there is no quote unquote professional version of the M1 Mac out there quite yet. The consumer versions, if that's what we want to call them, are quite capable, and we can use them for the stuff that we do as creatives. But as I found out, and as I think a lot of other people have found out, when you have like specific needs or to do your job, and then you hit a barrier like not being able to have more than one external monitor, it becomes really challenging. And that's why I continue to be just a little frustrated and a little skeptical of just about every YouTuber out there who's like holding up a Mac Mini in front of their face and saying this is the best computer that I've ever owned. It's a really good computer, but it has very natural shortcomings that if you are a pro user can't be overcome, you know? And for me, I don't know. I feel like that narrative that's been out there since the M1 chips have come out has given people a false sense of what those computers are capable of and what people should think about them as. The M1 machines are highly capable, very basic computers that in this day and age, like the fact that you can get a computer like the Mac Mini for $699 and it's as powerful as something that cost 2 or 3 times that a year ago. That's an incredible feat. However, it's not the whole story. And I just think that a lot of the narrative out there about the M1 chips and the machines that have them has been, wow, look how impressive this is. This can do this. This can do that. I can edit 4K video, and I can do this, that, the other thing. And I think it gives people the false impression that they could use these machines for anything and not have to worry about it. But I personally have found that not to be the case. Now, could you work around it? And as Hugo says, kind of hack your system to do what you want and need to do with it? Yes. But in 2021, with all this power that's available to us, I really don't think you should have to. So yeah, I do understand where you're coming from, Hugo, and I do understand the kind of frustration, and I do think that whether it's a 16-inch MacBook Pro or a 27-inch iMac or both that we get with WWDC, or if we don't see them this time, but we see them in the fall, that will sort of fill out the lineup enough that we can all be satisfied with the purchase that we make. But I just don't understand. I mean, maybe somebody else can explain it to me, because I don't understand the narrative that a lot of the media has been putting out there about these machines. I mean, yes, I was as giddy as the next person about their capabilities, but I came crashing down to earth pretty quickly when I realized that I was trading. I was getting a lot of computer, but if I wanted to use the computer as my main machine, I was trading off a lot of stuff that I didn't want to. So it's not a perfect situation. Thelonious says, what if you think of the Mac as a car or a truck and the iPad as a motorcycle? All transportation devices, but one is a lifestyle choice. I can see that. I can see that to a certain extent. Although I might say that the iPad is more like an electric car, and not like a smart car, not like a Tesla, like a smart car. It's got like 30 miles of range, and it can go only so far, and then you have to stop and get into the big boy car, right? That's kind of the way I look at the iPad. And so it's not a perfect system. Let's see. Will I do a live stream? Yeah, I'm not going to live stream the event because that gets tricky. Like, I could live stream it on Twitch. I know there have been people who have live streamed Apple events on YouTube and then gotten like copyright takedowns and all kinds of stuff. But I'll probably like live tweet it a little bit as I watch, and then I will do a reaction video afterwards, and probably have that up. The event is at 12 o'clock my time, so probably by like 3 or so o'clock, I'll have something up, giving my thoughts on the whole deal. John says, I think for just $9.99, you get great power and 20-hour battery life right there. No PC comparison. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, you're absolutely right. And I really don't think that. I think the gap between Macs and PCs is much larger again than it was this time last year, right? They're not running the same chips, so they can't be as easily compared. And in doing that, like, part of the reason I switched back over to PC and I've stayed here at this point is because I know that there's no good, like, holistic Mac solution for me. So I can make the PC do all the stuff that I want. When I'm on a Mac right now, I have to work around a bunch of stuff in order to make it what I want it to be. So for the time being, and maybe for longer than not, PC is my platform right now. And I know that there are people out there like, oh yeah, you'll be back with the Mac. Like, maybe so. I've never claimed to be the most consistent person in the world, but as of now, like, the PC is just the better choice for what I need to do. And in saying that, this is a place that I've never been in my life as a computer user, as a professional content creator. I've never been in this place where suddenly the PC is the better, more flexible and consistent choice than the Mac. And you would think that it would go the other way because now the Macs are becoming more powerful, et cetera, et cetera. But until this whole M1 thing shakes itself out, it's not the case. Michael says, I bought the Galaxy Book Pro 360 because of the promise of it being similar to the MacBook Air, and it gets about half the battery life and nowhere near the editing performance for $400 more. Yeah. There's going to be a lot of soul searching is going to happen in the PC world. Because the value proposition is no longer there. I don't know that I haven't looked at the specs of the Galaxy Book Pro, but I don't know that it's like as user upgradable as PC laptops once were. And, if it's, walking, talking, and acting like a Mac, but isn't as powerful and is more expensive, then what's the point? When you start to make that comparison, it's really hard to make that make sense. Tech for Your Needs says, lossless audio. Right now, the technology can't take advantage due to the hardware limitations in Bluetooth. You need a headphone jack to take advantage of it. Wired headphones. Yes, you do. And I don't see, I'm going to say this as clearly as possible. I don't see any way that any of the devices that Apple has on the market right now that are designed to deliver audio via Bluetooth, I don't see any way in the near or even far future that those devices will be able to deliver lossless audio to the user. Bluetooth is not designed to do that. I mean, I use the analogy of piping as the way that I talk about this. But if you have this, a huge column of water and you want to stuff it through a 1-inch pipe, it's just not going to go. There's a bottleneck there, and it's going to mess things up. So Apple has sort of, again, opened another Pandora's box for themselves where, they told us that that we didn't need the headphone jack. Now they're giving us lossless audio. And lossless audio can only be enjoyed via a headphone jack. And so what's Apple going to do? I mean, are they going to start making devices with headphone jacks? I mean, they took the headphone jack out the iPad, which I thought was the stupidest thing, the iPad Pro at least, the stupidest thing that they could possibly do. Because that was still the device that, a lot of people would sit in bed and put headphones on and use. And now if you're not somebody who can afford, a wireless headphones, and wireless headphones are such a pain in the neck half the time. Sometimes if you're getting in bed to watch, Dirty John or whatever, and and you have to like try and pair your headphones and they don't pair, and then you got to just plug it in, listen. Yeah. So it's a very weird. Yeah, Apple. Well, you guys got a good point. Apple's caught in the midst of their own minimalism, and I don't even know if it's minimalism so much as like their desire to try and enforce their own sort of viewpoint on how things should be done on their consumers, and then suddenly technology moves forward and it's possible to deliver lossless audio through streaming, and they've eliminated the thing that is necessary to do that. What we say howdy here. Well, howdy. Says headphone jack is not necessary for enjoying lossless audio. USB out to a DAC works. Yes. But what are you plugging into that USB-C out to a DAC? A 3.5 millimeter jack, right? Or speakers that connect in some way via wire. So it's not that the headphone jack is the necessary port. It's that at some point the D has to become an A. And it used to be that you could get the D to the A right there on the machine. And now you have to get the D to the A through some series of dongles. And a lot of those dongles will not pass the quality that you're looking for when you're talking digital lossless audio. Most people, when they talk about digital lossless audio, are talking about 24-bit, 192 kilohertz files. A lot of USB-C DACs will not pass anything higher than 48 or 96K, which, man, if you can tell the difference between 192 and 96, then you're a better man than I, Gunga Din. However, if we want to be sticklers about it, and usually audio people want to be sticklers about these kinds of things, it's got to be able to do 24 192. And the only way that you're going to get 24 192 to your ears is with some sort of wire plugged into something, be it a DAC or a headphone jack or whatever. So we say howdy here, says connect a bunch of things. How about Stax electrostatic headphones or a full old school stereo rig? I mean, yeah, those are all great options. I would love to be able to do that. Now, one thing about a modern digital, say, audio video AV receiver or something like that, is that you can AirPlay from your device to, say, like my Sony DN1080. And then, like, now we're talking the possibility of lossless, and we're not talking Bluetooth. But as long as we're talking Bluetooth, we're never talking lossless. We're always talking lossy. And I don't know how to communicate this. Like a lot of the questions that I have been getting in my lossless audio videos are questions about, like, well, if I use the dongle that you can get from Apple, the Lightning to 3.5 millimeter, can I get lossless? And as far as I know, with that dongle that comes with that, or, well, that used to come with, but that you can buy for $10, I think that's only 48K. I need to look it up. I'm not sure. So now everybody is curious about it, and the answers aren't easy. And at the end of the day, like, and John Mack says, he thinks his XM4 sound great, and I don't disagree. I mean, I love the AirPods Max. I think the Sonys do sound great. I think the Bose 700 sound great. I'm not saying that you can't listen to and enjoy music without, having the most pristine audio path possible. Bluetooth has come a long way in terms of passing. Well, the codecs have come a long way in terms of taking the lossy files and transferring them over into some higher level of quality. The files themselves have become higher quality files as well. I mean, it's really hard to tell the difference between a 320-bit MP3 and a lossless WAV file. And so Hugo says lossless is 24-bit, 44.1 kilohertz. And high res is 24-bit, 96. Well, I don't know. So this is another conversation. This is another conversation that people are throwing around high res because there's high res audio, which is a certification that you can get if what you're passing through is of a certain quality, like the Soundcore. The Soundcore headphones are high res audio certified. You pay for that certification as well. I mean, so you pay to have the little logo on there. You have to have a certain fidelity. I can't remember exactly what it is, but to the best of my knowledge, so CD quality is 16-bit, 44.1 kilohertz is what every CD was, that has ever been, well, not ever been made, but that was the CD standard. So that was considered lossless. When you're talking about 24-bit or 32 floating point or anything like that, 192 is kind of like where, to my impression is, 192 kilohertz is what is like sort of the finest wine that you could possibly have in terms of lossless. I don't know that there's very many people out there that can hear 192, but that's another thing. I mean, it's as pristine as you can get. Now, Hugo says ALAC sounds like FLAC, and it is. It's the Apple lossless audio codec. Just like I think FLAC stands for, I want to say free, but it stands for the same thing, but just the F means something different. It's an open source codec. And we say howdy here says lossless means compressed without loss. Adding it just gives another thing that we can take advantage of in the right circumstances. I'm gonna have to disagree with you here, because it isn't. Lossless audio is by definition uncompressed. Free lossless audio codec. Thank you for looking that up for me, Hugo. Like when I record a file, let's say I record at 24-bit 96K, right? That is a full fat lossless file. There's no compression going on whatsoever. And if I take that file and I listen to it on my stereo, it is a lossless file. It has not been compressed in any way. Now, if I mix down my song and I mix it down to a lossless format, whether it be AIFF or WAV or any of the others, and then I pass it off. Like it's a matter of scale, right? So a lossless audio file might be, and I'm just saying randomly here, like 40 megabytes, whereas like an MP3 might be 4, right? It's possible to compress all sorts of things without loss. It is possible, yes, but that's not that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about lossless audio. See, the thing is, like, if it's lossless, it can't be compressed. Like, the two things are antithetical of one another. It can't, it just, like, lossless means no compression. Because compression it's not the same kind of compression that you think of when you think of you're compressing, like, audio in a, like, right now I'm using an 1176 style compressor that's sort of crunching down the sound and sort of taking off the peaks and the valleys and making everything a certain level. So that's compression. But compression, when we're talking about audio into files that are then played for playback, what happens in a lot of these compression algorithms is you are taking information out. You're taking information out of the file so that you can make it smaller. And MP3s would take from the top and the bottom. And if you listen to say Apple Music versus Spotify versus Tidal versus YouTube Music or whatever, you can hear the difference between the compression algorithms that they use, because they are all different and they all have varying levels of quality. But if you encode something as a lossless file, as I understand it, the file in its encoded form should still have the same number of ones and zeros in the same order as the file that it was encoded from. That is lossless. So that's why compression without loss that doesn't mean anything to me. I don't know. I don't know how you can compress something without losing without losing something. But if you have sourcing, let me know what your source is so I can read up on it. I'll do some research myself and try and see where we're at cross purposes here, because as far as I know, zip files. Okay, so a zip file is a compressed file, yes, but you can't just open a zip file and look at the file inside. It's got to be unpacked and made whole again, the size that it was before it was compressed. Okay, so that's the same thing as I'm talking about. Like, a lossless file hasn't been compressed at all. It has all of the same stuff that it had in it when it was made. It might just be encoded to be able to be passed through a certain operating system or something like that. Frank says that's what makes lossless audio so impressive, that it can maintain quality with compression. I'm going to have to look this up, because, like, my definition of lossless is something totally different. And Tech for Now says, the majority of music subscribers are just okay with MP3. Yeah, and there's no reason not to be. I've said this every time I've had this conversation. It doesn't matter what format. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what format you're listening to. I mean, you can be listening on a busted transistor radio in your grandfather's basement. You can still experience the music, and the music can deliver its intended impact through a busted speaker that sounds like crap. Or you could listen through a $50,000 stereo that sounds like, pristine sound handed down from the Lord above, and have that experience. And they can be the same experience. Because music, the thing about hi-fi is that the music is not exactly the music is in some ways secondary to the gear when it comes to hi-fi. So when we're talking about lossless audio, or we're talking about 3.5 millimeter versus Bluetooth or whatever, then it's a totally different thing. And so Hugo says a WAV file is so WAV file being the same source, FLAC is going to be significantly smaller. But I guess my question is, like, is that FLAC compressing it, or is it like I think we're at cross purposes with how compression is being defined. To me, compression of digital audio files implies that things have been removed from the file in order to be able to make it fit through that smaller pipe that I was talking about before. So Franklin says FLAC is still somewhat compressed, still lossless, but not in the same way as AFF or WAV. Okay, they have zero compression. I see what you mean there, but that to me is that's not the way I think about compression of audio. I don't think of FLAC as like a compressed source, if you know what I mean, because it's basically the same thing. It's just in a different container. Once FLAC audio is decompressed, you don't lose the data. Okay, so that makes more sense. I mean, that makes more sense to me when we're talking that way. Yeah. But compression to me has always, in the detrimental sense that we talk about when we talk about digital audio, compression has always meant that something has been taken away or lost from the file by necessity, so it could be played back. Wesley says the art of removing data but not signal 10 A's in a row is shortened in a way that can be rebuilt at the end. No, yeah, I see what you mean. And the intent there is to do kind of say what I'm talking about. Whereas, as I said, when we're talking lossy versus lossless, I consider lossless being something that is ultimately the file as intended, whereas a lossy file, like a lossy source, like an MP3 or something like that, then will inherently have things missing. So I think we're agreeing we're just using different languages, if that makes any sense. Tech Free Need says, I've learned a lot about lossless audio from this conversation. Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, anybody, I'm learning things as well. Anybody who claims to know everything is selling you something. But yeah, John Mack says he has to run. I got to get going here in a second too. But just to finish off, Michael says, I did some reading and the compression algorithm is used to zero out the silence while maintaining the quality of the original sounds, because there was just nothing there. It's just where nothing is making a sound is reduced to zero. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. There's a guy, I think his name is Ola England. He's German, I think. He did a great video where he compared the files downloaded from all the different streaming services. And there's a way that you can sort of not really reverse the polarity of the waveform when you're looking at it to see what's missing. And in some of them, when you flipped it, you could see that not much was really missing from the audio. But then like with YouTube music, you flipped it around and it's almost like just a reverse picture. Like that's how much was gone. Um, and so like that's what I think of when I think of lossless. So I think we've worked our way we've worked our way around to an understanding. Um, Damlin says, still, all this lossless audio to me, none of this means anything unless you have the right hertz and bit rate is second to me. Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, the quality of the gear that you have matters. What matters ultimately most is how well your ears are trained to be able to differentiate the what is there in the lossless file that isn't there in the lossy file. And it's a very difficult thing to do, especially these days when something like like Franklin says here, basically a FLAC uses the same technique as a variable bitrate MP3. Like it's very difficult to take. It's very difficult to like take a 32 kilobit per second or a variable bitrate MP3, listen to that, and then listen to a lossless file and be able to tell the difference. It's very, very difficult. And if you don't have the right kind of equipment and then your ears aren't sensitive enough to be able to know the difference, then it doesn't really matter. I mean, and that's the thing. A lot of this stuff doesn't matter, but I think a lot of times what frustrates me, and the reason why I think it's really important to get the information out there so that people understand to at least a certain extent, is that Apple will tell you either by implication or omission that spatial audio is as good or better than lossless audio, right? That's the implication that I get from Apple's verbiage. And the truth of the matter is that's not the case. Lossless audio is always going to be the best possible reproduction of the sound that you can get. It might not be the most noticeable or even the most enjoyable difference, but it is in its purest form that audio as it's intended. And spatial audio and Dolby Atmos and things like that are not the same thing, but I think Apple wants us to sort of equate them together. And ultimately, that's, I want to at least give people the opportunity to understand that there's potentially value for them to learn how to play back, listen, and enjoy the lossless aspect of audio. I mean, we haven't had lossless audio has not been a thing since like the late 90s. Every file that we've listened to everywhere for 20 years has been a lossy file. Digital media has always been lossy. It was the easiest way to deliver it. And yes, you could rip stuff from CD and get, you could rip stuff from CD at 24-bit 192, but you're still upscaling 16-bit 44.1 to, so it's not even the same thing. But now the technology is here that we can listen and we can enjoy like something that wasn't possible before for the majority of other people. Spatial audio, and Tech for Now says spatial audio is just a cool technique that adds dimension to a sound base on a reference point. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I'm not saying that it's a bad thing or you shouldn't like it if you hear it or anything like that. I just want to be sure that like we define our terms effectively, and that spatial audio isn't like sort of sold to us as some equation, or some parallel to a lossless file, because that's That's not the same. And Hugo says analog lossless versus digital lossless. Yeah, I mean, an analog. See, that's the whole thing. It used to be like they used to back in the day. They would put on CDs how the audio was recorded at each stage, right? So you would see AAD, right? So analog recording, analog mixing, digital mastering, right? And if it was on a CD, the D always came last. But these days, you would just see DDD. It's 9 times out of 10. There are still people who use tape, but it's a thing. Yeah, and as Franklin says, high res audio. The definition of high res audio is sort of, now that we're talking about real lossless audio, high res audio kind of like muddies the water of this discussion. Like, that's another terminology that we have to define even more to separate it out for the sake of not being too confusing. So Howdy says, Wikipedia, digital audio compressed by FLAC's algorithm can typically be reduced between 50 and 70% of its original size and decompressed to an identical copy of the original audio. Okay, perfect. That's what I wanted to know. 8-track. I mean, people make fun of 8-tracks, but 8-track was a pretty high fidelity way to listen to music back in the day. I mean, that tape was, I think that was not a half inch, but I forget what the actual tape width was, but it was a good fat tape to get signal onto. And so when we're talking about analog versus digital and like analog high fidelity versus digital high fidelity, they're two like totally separate things. I still know people who use like BBE stuff in the studio or in their live rigs or anything like that. I mean, sort of the same thing as like Dolby noise reduction for tape decks back in the 70s and 80s. And yeah, I grew up listening to like 8-tracks. My dad had 8-track players in his trucks. We had them in our cars. First song I ever learned to sing was on an 8-track that came from the factory with the Chevy Nova that we bought in like 1976, or it was a 76 Nova, so we bought it in 75. But yeah, 8-tracks were a whole different thing, and not the most convenient method of playback, but not terrible sounding if you had a good deck. If you had a good deck, it wasn't terrible sounding. But now we're over 2 hours. We got down in the weeds. I'm glad that we did. I'm glad we got some of this stuff figured out. But this is stuff that I really want to make videos about. I want to make videos that explain this stuff in a way that people can decipher it and understand and sort of make a choice whether they want to care about this or not. Because you don't have to. But now that it's possible, I think that there's a potential for like a new renaissance in sort of music appreciation. That as long as people can get a hold of the equipment that they need to really be able to enjoy the stuff, then we'll be in good shape. So anyway, folks, I'm gonna be done though. Like, this is like 3 or 4 hours worth of live streaming I've done today. But it's all been good. I had a really good time. I hope you guys did too. I'm going to make a video tomorrow and hopefully have it up tomorrow. New episode of the Painfully Honest podcast is coming out tomorrow as well. Wednesday is the new release day for the Painfully Honest podcast. And yeah, we'll just keep rolling and moving on toward Friday. And I'll have another live stream in the morning. And then Monday, we've got WWDC, and we'll just have to see what happens. But we'll talk about it. Anyway, thanks for a good evening, folks. I'll talk to you all later. Once again, my name is Jason, sometimes known as the JTL. This is the Painfully Honest Tech live show, the live stream of the Painfully Honest Tech.